Yes. Yes, it is our position that if the books criticize a political candidate, a politician, the federal government can ban books. As far as I'm concerned, that is a terrifying view of the First Amendment. Citizens United was decided 5-4. By a narrow 5-4 majority, the Supreme Court concluded the First Amendment did not allow the federal government to punish you for making a movie critical of a politician. And likewise, that the federal government couldn't ban books. 4 justices dissented. 4 justices were willing to say the federal government can ban books and can ban movies and presumably could ban books as well. When Hillary Clinton was running for president, she explicitly promised every justice she nominated to the court would pledge to overturn Citizens United. By the way, Hillary Clinton said she would demand of her nominee something you have rightly said that this administration has not demanded of you, which is a commitment on any case as to how you will rule. Democrats have shown no compunction in expecting their nominees to make a promise. Here's how I'm going to vote on a pending case. Judicial ethics be damned. Or how about the Second Amendment? We've heard some reference to the Heller decision. Senator from Connecticut yesterday talked about reasonable gun control and gun safety provisions. Well, that, of course, was not what was at stake in the Heller decision. Number one, majority decision in Heller, Justice Scalia's opinion, acknowledges reasonable provisions, things like prohibitions on felons in possession are permissible. Your opinion in the Cantor decision likewise acknowledged that restrictions preventing dangerous criminals from receiving firearms are entirely consistent and permissible under the Second Amendment. But the issue at Heller was much more fundamental. It was whether the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms at all. The vote in Heller was 5-4. By a vote of 5-4, the majority struck down the District of Columbia's total prohibitions on owning an operative firearm in the District of Columbia. The argument of the 4 dissenters was not what our Democratic colleagues talk about here. It wasn't some reasonable gun control provisions are okay. That was not the argument of the dissenters. That question we can actually have a reasonable debate on. Reasonable minds can differ on what the appropriate line should be, what are reasonable laws there, but that was not what was at issue at Heller. The position of the 4 dissenters was the Second Amendment protects no individual right to keep and bear arms whatsoever, but merely a, quote, collective right of the militia, which is fancy lawyer talk for a non-existent right. 4 justices would have ruled that way, 1 vote away. The consequences of the court concluding that there is no individual right under the First Amendment would mean you and I and every American watching this would lose your Second Amendment right. It would mean the federal government, the state government, the city could ban guns entirely, could make it a criminal offense for any one of us to own a firearm. And no individual American would have any judicially cognizable right to challenge that. That is a radical reading of the Constitution. That is effectively erasing the Second Amendment from the Bill of Rights. And Hillary Clinton likewise promised in 2016 that every justice she nominated would commit to voting to overturn Heller. They were big on litmus tests. And Joe Biden, although he refuses to answer just about anything about whether or not he's going to pack the court, he did tell the American people the voters don't deserve to know whether he's going to pack the court. Truly a statement of disrespect and contempt for the voters, unusual in our political process. 1 vote.
Before he goes any further, I want to weigh in on what he's talking about here as far as banning books, which is banning freedom of speech, and then banning guns. Words are words until words are turned into actions. You can call somebody a bad name. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But the fact of the matter is, words do hurt certain people. And they don't have to be in a threatening measure. You call somebody a bad name. You call an elderly person a bad name. And that's basically abusing your authority on the grounds of the First Amendment. Because whenever our ancestors wrote the First Amendment, they felt like that people was going to have enough common sense to know not to abuse or to manipulate the First Amendment. Whenever it comes to dishonoring and disrespecting people, dishonoring and disrespecting your elders, dishonoring and disrespecting the American flag and the Pledge of Allegiance, our ancestors had no intentions of giving people the right under the umbrella clause of being able to do these things against our very own society. If they had of, they would have been insane during the time that they wrote the Constitution. Now let's look at the gun laws. The right to bear arms. Doesn't necessarily mean firearms, but you have the right for a BB gun, slingshot, bow and arrow. You have a right to a musket loader. You have a right, yes, even to a AK-47 or an AR, according to today's standards. But during the time that the Constitution was written, and this is the part that people take out of perspective towards not rightly dividing not only what we're saying, but rightly dividing when it was said. The right to bear arms, firearms. When those laws was written, they did not have AK-47s. They did not have ARs. They did not even have semi-firing devices that would fire simultaneously again and again and again. The only thing they had back then was powder guns. Now, let's look at where they're trying to go with this under the safety guidelines, the safety laws. Okay? You're going to tell people that they're not eligible to have AK-47s and ARs under the safety guidelines because they are more apt to go out here and do something foolish or crazy with a militia or any other kind of group in becoming that much more lethal either to federal, state, or local authorities. Which, by Frank, just frightens the death out of people that's already in law enforcement pertaining to having all this type of artillery out there. And you can't really blame them. But my point has always been this under the safety guideline rule. You're going to tell an individual that you can't have a gun, but yet now you can take an automobile and use it as a instrument of death and go in and crash in and kill 10, 11, 12, 20, 30, maybe 100 people and injure another 100 people with just an automobile. A doctor and a judge has always had the performance duties of being able to pull an individual from open society based around the fact that they are either a harm to themselves or a harm to society. They can literally pull that person out of society. They can take them away from making a $100 an hour job out of society and put them in a hospital. Put them in a padded cell. Okay? Based around safety and security. But yet now, our own government that sees that these people that has these multiple guns, these firing devices that can fire multi-times, and it don't have to be an AR or AK-47, they see that it has been misplaced and being put in the hands of the wrong people. That does make it a safety issue. Of people that's either a harm to themselves or a harm to society in these regards, but yet now law enforcement officials refuses to do anything about it. So where exactly is the line between safety and security versus somebody's rights? Because like I said, whenever they pull the rights away from an individual towards not being able to have contact with a firearm, they're still in contact with a bow and arrow. They're still in contact with other devices, including an automobile, that they can use as a weapon. The fact of the matter is, you have to project the Constitution not only where it was written here in the United States, but when it was written. And the Constitution was written in the 18th century to give people in dilated rights to be able to protect themselves in case society was going to go bonkers. And that's exactly what we've seen just within the past 25 or 30 years, that society has gone bonkers. This is whenever God the Father steps in. And I have said this before, and it's worthwhile mentioning. Once a society gets out of hand to the point that it is uncontrollable, that's whenever God the Father will control that society one way or the other, even at the expense of bringing death and destruction to that society. And if he don't bring it in the form of plagues, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, wars, famines, he'll bring it in other areas. He will put an end to the recklessness that society is performing upon to itself, especially whenever it continues to harm and hurt innocent lives, and it's nothing more than a cesspool that's being breeded from one generation to another generation that actually becomes worse throughout society as it travels through its own citizens, kind of like a cancer. Once a society is on this trajectory, if it don't stop, either out of self-will or force from the government, regardless whether it's federal, state, or local government, then Big Brother upstairs, and I'm not talking about Big Brother towards it being the government, but I'm talking about the Creator. That's whenever the Creator steps in, just as it's talking about in the first 4 chapters of Revelations, to repent, for I have not yet found thy works perfect yet. To go back and do thy first works over again. In other words, get it right. Even if it requires the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, or the dozen of times, get it right. Because if you don't get it right, he's saying that he will throw us off into great tribulation. Great tribulation, not minor tribulation. Not minor tribulation. We're in minor tribulation right now. People think that it can't get no worse. I got news for you. It can get 1,000 times worse. Once God the Father comes back and he gathers up the elect from the four corners of the earth, and he basically strikes a fire down here up onto the planet, burning everything that man has ever either planted, said, or done. Anything that is burnable, regardless whether it be residential or commercial. Oh yeah, things can very well get worse. So badly that you couldn't even begin to imagine how bad that these things could get. If we as a society can't unify, can't come together, just as Christ talked about, that a divided house will not stand, then we will see our institutions here in America basically come crashing and tumbling down. And I tend to wonder if that's where a lot of people desire for this to go, into total chaos that could possibly lead into another civil war. I tend to wonder if this is where a great deal of society is wanting this to go. That way they could laugh in the face of God by saying, yeah, you promised us peace in various scriptures. You promised us a utopia. But yet now, instead of us getting a utopia, all we get is chaos. In other words, society thinks that it would give it the right to shake their fist in the face of God and say, you caused this, you caused this, you caused this. The whole time, it wasn't that God caused this, it was humanity that turned against itself that caused this, because it wasn't smart enough to identify the loopholes. It wasn't smart enough to identify the potholes. It wasn't smart enough to foresee these things that are causing so much havoc and chaos in our everyday lives. But yet now you want to pick on the Christians. You want to pick on those who are preaching the truth and telling what they believe in their experiences as well as their interpretations of the Bible. You want to pick on these people that validate the very words that I now preach. What does the Bible say about this period of time? It says, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants here upon earth, for great wrath has come down from heaven. For Satan is lashing out, for he knoweth his time is shortened. We must identify where we are versus where they was then versus where we want to be tomorrow. If there is ever going to be a sustaining truth for our children and our children's children in regards to peace and utopia, in regards to a society that is thriving, to prosper, protect, and take care of each other, we are going to have to awaken out of this cloud of despair that obviously we are under right now towards people being bewitched, and figure out not just how to hunker down, but figure out how to work our way out of this intolerable moment that has befallen upon the we the people. God did not cause this. We the people has caused this. And it has been Satan that has blinded we the people, that has caused we the people to cause this. As I said a while ago, if we're not smart enough to identify how to rectify these things and get over this and make these things different to the point that we can make society safer and more productive, that's whenever God the Father will step in and He will rectify it for us. And if you think things is bad now, hang around to the main enchilada whenever the wrath of God sure enough falls upon the society in ways such as man cannot even begin to fathom, can't even begin to imagine of what's going to occur. These are all wake-up calls. Wake-up calls that should be awakening people in our despair. We are in a point of despair. We are in a point of crisis right now. We're not on top of the mountain. We can look back and see where our ancestors after World War II, throughout the late 60s and the 70s, and even throughout the 80s and 90s, up until 9/11, we was a thriving #1 nation towards being #1 in almost every compartment and department that you can think of. We're no longer that nation. We have been belittled to the point that now you can go into some of your major corridors and into some of your major cities, such as Orange Mounds down in Memphis, Tennessee, or other places in Chicago or Nashville or New York or LA, and literally see where we are turning into a third world country in our morals, in our ethics, and how we perceive and treat each other. There has to be some sort of a silver lining to this demise that we're all in right now, that is steadily retracting and getting worse. And we have to have somebody on the outside smart enough to identify where we are, to say enough is enough of this barbaric brutality that we're all suffering through, and try to turn it around. To try to turn it around. And with God, and because of God, and through God, all things is possible, even turning it around. Please, as you're listening to this, remember there is so much on the line in regards to who we are as a free, fair, open democracy. A democracy that, even though it knows the 1%ers always hold a leg ahead of the average percenters, which is the 99%ers, at least we can still determine on what we like, what we don't like, what we want, what we don't want, who we want in power, what we're striving towards, and what we're not striving towards. There has to be a middle ground for a democracy to work. It cannot be one-sided, but it has to be a middle ground to where one side compromises just as much as another. It's just like a marriage. You cannot have a marriage to where one person is doing all the compromising. Not if it's a genuine, fair marriage. Because there's going to come times to where the one person is going to have to compromise if he or she wants to carry on with that relationship because of the hardship that has befallen up onto that relationship. So it has to be like a ping pong. It has to go from one to another, back and forth. It's her turn, it's his turn, it's her turn, it's his turn. It's all of our turns. And you have to meet a balance. And without that balance, you do not have a thriving society called a democracy. So as you're listening to this, please understand that these things are crucial. They are imperative in what they're talking about today for the future of not necessarily us for tomorrow, but for our children and for our children's children that as of right now don't have a voice. They don't have the privilege of speaking like I do right now and maybe bringing some insight or some enlightenment in what we're doing and why we're doing it. Little Johnny, little Sally, little Johnny, that's now 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, one day will have that opportunity of speaking their piece. But as of right now, they don't have that opportunity. We are their lifeline. We are their future. And if we fail, we not only fail for ourselves, but we fail for them too as well. That is crucial. We're at a very crucial point in time in history in America right now, probably more so than any other event other than possibly maybe the beginning phases of the Civil War. I feel like that was just as interesting as well as predominant towards valuing the things that was said and done in the beginning phases of the Civil War as it was the ending of the Civil War. And those things was very, very important towards what was said and what was done that led into the Civil War, just like the things that was said and done that led us out of the Civil War. In the bash of the Civil War was nothing more than blood and guts, smoke, fire and brimstone, condemnation up on the both sides, to the point that it was total anarchy, that no one could see through the haze, the smoke, the troubled times that we was in. And it actually took for a great deal of that smoke to subside. A great deal of the crying, the remorse had to subside before people come together and started discussing what we needed to do and what we was going to do, regardless whether we liked it or not. Because like I said, we're right now at that brink towards the Heavenly Father stepping in and intervening in all this. Do you not think that God the Father was sick and tired of everything that was going on during the great American Civil War, of the horrendous times that has befallen upon to society here in America, to the point that God was right at the brink of intervening, of bringing destruction to the whole clan, to the whole body? Sure he was. God's got his limitations towards what he'll see, what he'll experience, and what he'll go through before he'll put an end to the human race. And that's things that bother me. That's the things that I can foresee. And those are the warnings that I can issue out to my viewers, and possibly awakening them so that they will listen and make a good, conscious choice. So please, as you listen to this, remember those words.
A statement of disrespect and contempt for the voters, unusual in our political process. One vote away from the Second Amendment being erased from the Bill of Rights. None of our Democratic colleagues admit that that is their agenda, and yet those are the justices that Democratic presidential nominees are promising they will appoint. Justices who will take away your right to criticize politicians, justices who will allow censorship, justices who will allow movies and books to be banned, justices who will erase the Second Amendment from the Bill of Rights. And how about religious liberty? Religious liberty is an issue near and dear to a great many of us. The right of every American to live according to your faith, according to your conscience, whatever that faith may be. Religious liberty is fundamentally about diversity. It's about respecting diversity, that whatever your faith tradition might be, the government is not going to trample on it. Religious liberty cases over and over again have been decided 5-4. The case of Van Orden versus Perry, a case I litigated, dealt with the Ten Commandments monument that stands on the state capitol grounds. It's been there since 1961 in Texas. An individual plaintiff, an atheist, a homeless man, filed a lawsuit seeking to tear down the Ten Commandments. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was decided 5-4. 4 justices were willing to say, in effect, send in the bulldozers and tear down that monument because you can't gaze on the image of the Ten Commandments on public land. Another case, the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial. This is a memorial erected to the men and women who gave their lives in World War I. It's a lone white Latin cross, simple and bare in the middle of the desert. I've been there on Sunrise Rock where it stands. The ACLU filed a lawsuit saying you cannot gaze on the image of a cross on public land, and the ACLU won in the district court. They won in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The federal court ordered that Veterans Memorial to be covered up with a burlap sack with a chain on the bottom, and then a plywood box. When the case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, I represented 3 million veterans pro bono for free, defending that Veterans Memorial.
Good for you.
We won 5-4. And there were 4 justices prepared to say, tear down the Veterans Memorial. And under the reasoning that they put forth, they were not far away from saying, bring out the chisels and remove the crosses and the stars of David on the tombstones of the men and women that gave their lives at Arlington Cemetery defending this nation.
I want to weigh in again, just as of this morning. I put out another letter from the Windmill Ministries here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, verifying in how I felt about our president that has become so lax, who has become so reckless, to the point that now he gets on national TV and he tells people that the coronavirus is not a big deal. Well, it was this same president 5-6 months ago that said the coronavirus was just going to up and vanish and go away, and that it was a Democrat hoax. It's obvious whenever you look at the statistics of the medical arena here, not only in America, but throughout the planet, that the coronavirus, first of all, has not went away. And secondly, it may be possible that some people can catch the coronavirus and it will be a walk in the park. But it can be that some people catch the coronavirus and it's the most devastating thing that they've ever experienced in their entire life. And some, it even takes their lives. Just here in America, we have topped off over 210,000 lives that has been taken because of COVID-19. So in a way, I compared the President of the United States and his recklessness towards being an occult leader, similar towards the occult leader that sprung up years ago called Jim Jones. If I would have done that, been living in Russia, and decided that I wanted to spew out that type of negativity at the leader of the Federation that used to be the old USSR by the name of President Putin, I would have immediately been arrested for making the statement. They would have come and dismantled all of my material. They would have taken down all of my posts. They would have destroyed all of my equipment, put me in jail, and possibly threatened my life, or may have just went in and executed me on the spot. That's the difference between who and where we're at today, living in America, towards having these inalienable rights versus living in a communist control country such as China, South America, or even Russia. Thank God that I'm in the United States of America towards doing what I'm doing for the Heavenly Father. Though they have tried to stop me, though they have tried to ambush me, though they have tried to set me up, though they have tried to bring all kinds of lies and false accusations about me, I'm still living. I still have air in my lungs, though I'm not in the best shape of what I was 25, 30 years ago when God first spoke to me and put me and set me a sail on this path. But thank God that I'm still living today to the point that I can do what I'm doing right now by issuing out these advisories to my viewers towards telling them we have a problem, Houston. Now, what are we going to do about it? And it's not just a problem here in America pertaining to the Sputnik program, the Apollo program, that put out a warning over Apollo 13 that Houston, we have a problem, but we have a problem worldwide that was not handled properly and professionally whenever 9 tapes wound up going to the White House in 1988. After an individual such as myself in 1983 made claims that he was going to be the one to face the Antichrist, and before the poison arrow struck the flesh of his skin, that he would vanish or disappear off the planet, that's whenever Gabriel would blow the horn, and that's whenever we would be transfigurated from mortal to immortal in a twinkling of an eye, but that I was wrong about, because I'm not going to vanish instantly. I wish that I was. But even if I was to vanish instantly, I would still have to go through that transformation period from mortal to immortal pertaining to the taking away of the saints. Instead of me laying in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days while the world glocked over my dead body pertaining to the doomsday devil's duel that it speaks about towards the 2 witnesses that comes together in the great battle of Armageddon, the beginning phases of that great battle, of telling Satan, telling the Antichrist that the time has come for him to surrender and for him to put his material as well as his immaterial weapons down. Thank God I'm in America. Because if I was not in America, the very words that I am proclaiming today, October the 13th, making a declaration of what is being said on TV, I would not be saying them if I was in a communist controlled country such as Russia, China, South America, and other little bitty islands and countries that is spread abroad all over the planet. Thank God I am in America, and I am an American. an American. A Native American. A Indian Native American. Partial Native American Indian. Not full-blooded Native American Indian, but partial Native American Indian. In other words, I feel like that I've got just as much rights, and maybe even more so, than all these other foreign countries that has come over here and invaded this land, because the true American Indian was here way, way before anybody else showed up. Not to say that my rights is any righter or any greater than anybody else's, but the fact of the matter is my rights has been trampled upon. Is the reason why that I use this as a platform to be able to say my piece, to be able to reach out to my viewers.
That is a radical view, and we're one vote away. That is utterly contrary to the text of the First Amendment, to the understanding of the First Amendment. When we argued the Ten Commandments case in the U.S. Supreme Court, there was more than a little bit of irony. And that, do you know how many times the image of the Ten Commandments appears in the courtroom of the Supreme Court? The answer to that is 43. There are 2 images of the Ten Commandments carved on the wooden doors. As you walk out of the courtroom, you will soon be sitting looking at them. There are 40 images of the Ten Commandments on the bronze gates on both sides of the courtroom. And then, Judge Barrett, when you're sitting at the bench, above your left shoulder will be a frieze you know well. A frieze carved into the wall of great lawgivers, one of whom is Moses. He is standing there holding the Ten Commandments, the text of which is legible in Hebrew, as he looks down upon the justices, and 4 justices were willing to say, in effect, bring out the sandblasters, because we must remove God from the public square. That is a profound threat to our religious liberty, and I would note that it doesn't just extend to public acknowledgments. It also extends to religious liberty. The Little Sisters of the Poor, our Catholic convent of nuns who take oaths of poverty, who devote their lives to caring for the sick, caring for the needy, caring for the elderly.
Yes.
The Obama administration litigated against the Little Sisters of the Poor, seeking to fine them in order to force them to pay for abortion-inducing drugs, among others. It's truly a stunning situation when you have the federal government litigating against nuns.
I knew, give or take about 25 years ago, whenever they mandated it towards no longer having prayer and paddling in school, that we would reach this day here in America one day to where we would see an uprising of the monsters that have been created, of those who thought that they could get out here and do whatever that they wanted to do and not have to suffer no type of consequences for it. And I'm one of the first ones to jump in line to say child abuse is wrong. Child abuse should be banned. Child abuse hurts a child more than it helps a child, regardless whether it's being too forceful with your discipline tactics, or you abuse the child emotionally, psychologically, or sexually. I'm one of the first ones that have stepped out into the line to say what is going on here with this child is wrong. But at the same time, I'm one of the first ones to acknowledge the banning of prayer in schools, the banning of paddling in schools, the banning of taking God out of our judicial justice system has put us just exactly where we are today. And now all of us are suffering the consequences simply because of a few that wanted to abolish God away from humanity. I don't know who it was. It was some female that wanted to take In God We Trust off the good old American dollar bill. And come very, very close of getting it achieved. I done forgot the woman's name, but there has been different programs, different movements like this that has put us where we are today. There was a film that come out in the 80s that Jesus Christ was gay. And this film got banned from all the theaters across the land. Today, that same film would probably go over and possibly be a hit of people trying to characterize Christ as him basically being an infidel. The devil in disguise. We have walked away from our true convictions. And I realized this whenever I stood in front of a federal judge in 2009 in Paducah, Kentucky. And this judge could not condemn me for one thing. A matter of fact, this federal judge complimented me on everything. And I basically brought embarrassment into his chambers because he recognized my passion in wanting to go after the very axis of evil, the very thing that his courts come very close in charging me with a Class E felony of premeditated murder. That basically was saying that they was protecting the axis of evil. They was protecting the rapist. They was protecting the theftery. They was protecting the murders. They was protecting anything that defiles God. And of course now today we see where Kentucky has been turned upside down with its drug activity and with its prison system corrupt, as well as its political structures that has crumbled. Not counting the police brutality that has happened in several different places in Kentucky. We are at a moment in time to where the things that we say and do for the next few days, for the next few weeks, will either make us or break us. As the little man used to say, this is either going to make us or this is going to break us. We are at that crossroads, not for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children, if we do not wisen up, listen up, and make the right decisions for not just ourselves, but for our children and our children's children. Serious is an understatement.
Supreme Court decided the Hobby Lobby case, another case routinely denounced by Senate Democrats. The Hobby Lobby case concluded that the federal government could not permissibly force a Christian business to violate their faith. It reflected the religious liberty traditions of our country, that you can live according to your faith without the government trampling on it. You know what this body did, I'm sorry to say? Senate Democrats introduced legislation to gut the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Religious Freedom Restoration Act, when it passed this body, passed with an overwhelming bipartisan majority. Senate Democrats including Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy, all voted for the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Democratic President Bill Clinton signed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
There you go.
And yet, in the wake of the Hobby Lobby decision, this body voted on legislation to just gut the protections for religious liberty. And I'm sorry to say, every single Senate Democrat voted to do so. Not a single one, zero, would defend religious liberty. Joe Biden has already pledged if he's elected, he plans to initiate again the attack on the Little Sisters of the Poor. You know, it's interesting. Folks in the press like to talk about Pope Francis. And on some issues, Pope Francis has been vocal when it comes to the environment, when it comes to issues concerning immigration. The Pope...
I don't know if what he's saying is accurate or not to my viewers. I don't see that it could be, due to the fact that Joe Biden pushes his belief pertaining to his Catholicism belief, in which I don't go along with all the Catholic analogies of what they believe in and how that they worship. But I don't see how that Joe Biden would be wanting to attack the Little Sisters in this way and still conceive himself as being a born-again Christian, if the statement that this Mr. CRUSZ has just made. Now, there's no doubt that some of these statements that he's making are true. I can't validate all of them. And it's probably also true that he's making up some of this stuff, maybe to soothe his own opinions about Joe Biden. I don't know. But whenever it comes to religious liberties, where society has messed up in interpreting this accurately, it's one thing to have a religion, and it's another thing to have a relationship. If you truly have a relationship, then you start defying the difference between ungodly and godly, righteous and unrighteous. And that's where a lot of preachers get in trouble, or teachers, or instructors, or messengers, or theologians, that whenever you get to teaching godliness over ungodliness, in keeping the commandments versus breaking them, that's by and large when you have such of a resistance movement that comes against you, that wants to basically tear your eyes out of your head and crucify you the same way that they crucified the main leader, which was Jesus Christ. You keep in mind that this nation has been overtaken from the inside out, pertaining to sorceryism, devil worshiping, Harry Potter, magic, anything to do with the paranormal. You know, 35, 40 years ago, the movie Exorcist was a big deal whenever it hit the big screen. Today, it's nothing unusual to watch HBO or Cinemax or Starz or any of the other major leading networks and see one paranormal movie after another where you're basically glorifying in these type of activities pertaining to monsters and things that move in the night and these creatures of the dark that come out of nowhere that swallow people up and turn them into basically the Walking Dead and all the above. Even our very children that glorify in these movies like Harry Potter, magical, wizardry, witches and warlocks is what has happened to this nation. And it's the very thing that has happened to other nations that has caused the wrath of God to fall upon them, to the point that those societies today, those cultures today, no longer exist because of plagues, wars, famines, earthquakes, volcanoes, meteor displacements that come out of the sky, are even being bombarded with comets and meteors. When God the Father says enough is enough, retribution, condemnation does not just fall upon to the adult guilty society, but it also falls upon to the innocent children society. So the stupid and the dumb, the ignorant, can blame God if they want to because of these horrible things that has happened to us. But the fact of the matter is, the fault falls upon the feet of those that allowed for it to grow and fester and turn into what that it has turned into. Because within all of us, we have two monsters. A monster of the good and a monster of the bad. And I use the word monster because monster ordinarily covers something that's big. Maybe I should use a different expression other than monster. We have two entities within us. An entity of good and an entity of bad. And the entity that lives is the entity that you feed the most. And if you feed off of hate, if you feed off of wanting to get even, Stephen, if you fear off of harm and hurt and wanting to take vengeance into your own hands, then that will be the entity or the monster that will survive and grow and will overcome the other entity. But if you feed off of love and forgiveness, if you feed off of being polite and gentle, if you feed off of the scriptures that says that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, then what you have fed will over excel and exceed over that in which what you didn't feed. And it's that way in all of our lives. You can either lean to the far right or to the far left. But it's those that straddle the middle are the ones that God says He will rebuke and spew thee out of thy mouth, according to the 7 churches in the first 4 chapters of Revelations. Those will be the ones that God rebukes and spews from His existence, because He does not want or like or will ever accept those that want to be a fence straddler.
Has been vocal on issues that our Democratic colleagues like and agree with. The press is happy to amplify those views. Somehow missing from that amplification is acknowledgement that when the Pope came to the United States in Washington, he went and visited the Little Sisters of the Poor. Here in D.C., he went to their home here in D.C., and the Vatican explained he did so because he wanted to highlight their cause. That the federal government shouldn't be persecuting nuns for living according to their faith. That's what's at stake in these nominations. And you won't hear any of that from the Senate Democrats on this committee. That's why their base is so angry at your nomination, Judge Barrett, because they don't believe you are going to join the radical efforts to erase those fundamental rights from the Bill of Rights. I believe that issue, preserving the Constitution, preserving the Bill of Rights, our fundamental liberties, I believe is the most important issue facing the country in the November elections. And I think for those of us who value those rights, we should take solace in the fact that not a single Democrat is willing even to acknowledge the radical sweep of their agenda, much less defend it. They know it's wildly unpopular, and look, right at the heart of this is a decision many Democrats have made to abandon democracy. You see, most policies like Obamacare, policies like health care, most policies under our constitutional system are meant to be decided by democratically elected legislatures. Why? So they can be accountable to the people. So if the voters disagree, they can throw the bums out. But too many Democrats have decided today that democracy is too complicated. It's too hard to actually convince your fellow Americans of the merits of your position. It's much easier just to give it to the courts. Find 5 lawyers in black robes and let them decree the policy outcome you want, which makes your radical base happy, presumably makes the millions, if not billions, in dark money being spent for Democrats happy, without actually having to justify it to the American people. Judge Barrett, I'm not going to ask you to respond to any of that. But I do want to shift to a different topic, which is a bit more about you personally, your background. Judge Barrett, do you speak any foreign languages?
Once upon a time, I could speak French, but I have fallen woefully out of practice, so please don't ask me to do that right now.
You can be assured of that, because I had 2 years of high school French, and I suspect yours remains much better than mine. How about music? Do you play any instruments?
The piano.
Do you? How long have you played the piano?
Well, I played the piano growing up for 10 years, and now most of my piano playing consists of playing my children's songs for them and supervising their own piano practice. I look forward one day when I have more time to be able to choose some of my own music.
Now, do the kids do piano lessons as well?
The kids do piano lessons. Some of the older ones who are in high school have gotten so busy with sports and those things that they've stopped, but the younger children do.
Our girls are 9 and 12, and they both do piano lessons, and I will say, at least in our household, it is less than voluntary. One of the things Heidi and I found, particularly the last 6 months during COVID, which has been an extraordinary crisis, is just with 2 kids at home, that doing distance learning when schools were shut down was really hard for us with 2 children. For you and your husband, you've got 7 kids. How did Joe manage through the lockdowns and distance learning? What was that like in the Barrett household?
Well, it was a challenging time, as it was for every American. Our oldest daughter, Emma, who's in college, moved home at that point because she's at Notre Dame. It closed. So Emma obviously could manage her own e-learning, and our high school age children, Tess and Vivian, could too. But Jesse and I just tried to take a divide and conquer approach for the younger 4. And yeah, it was quite challenging, I assure you.
One part of your story that I find particularly remarkable and that I admire is the decision you made to adopt 2 children. You and your husband had 5 biological children, and you adopted 2 more. Both of your adopted children are from Haiti. Haiti is a country that has some of the most crushing poverty in the world. My brother-in-law is a missionary in Haiti, and actually Heidi and the girls just got back from Haiti a couple of weeks ago. I was curious if you would share with this committee and with the American people what led you and your husband to make the decision to adopt? It's I think, one of the most loving and compassionate decisions any family can make.
When Jesse and I were engaged, we met another couple who had adopted, in this instance, it was a couple who had adopted a child with special needs. And then we also met another couple who had adopted a few children internationally. And we decided at that point, while we were engaged, that at some point in the future, we wanted to do that ourselves. And I guess we had imagined initially that we would have whatever biological kids that we had decided to have and then adopt at the end. But after we had our first daughter, Emma, we thought, well, why wait? So I was expecting Tess when we went and got Vivian. So she and Tess function, we call them our fraternal twins. They're in the same grade. And it really has enriched our family immeasurably. And, you know, once we had adopted Vivian at that point, then we made the decision that we definitely wanted to adopt again. And so several years later, John Peter entered our family.
And I couldn't agree with him more. That for people that want to reach out and adopt children is one of the most touching, gratifying movements from either an individual or a couple that can be accomplished in today's society, because of so many out there that have been raised up with either deadbeat dads or deadbeat moms or both, to the point that they feel alone, they feel rejected, they feel hurt, they feel like it, nobody cares about them, nobody loves them, nobody's willing to work with them and reform them. And I know personal couples all over that have reached out in the adopting agency that has done this, and may God have a special place in these people's lives that are willing to do this for the innocent and for others. There's so much bad in this country, but at the same time there's so much good. The good ordinarily gets overlooked because of the bad. But if we will just take a little bit of time in seeing what people does do for our neighborhoods, for our society, we will understand that these are part of the attributes that makes America so strong, that makes America so great, that makes America in what America is today. Like I was telling you all ago, that if I would have sent out a memo, such as I sent out this morning, of comparing our Chief and Commander Donald J. Trump towards him being an occult leader, or coming close of being an occult type leader similar to Jim Jones in other countries, I would have immediately been arrested. At the very least. At the very least. And then on top of that, they would have violated me worse than what I have ever been violated before here in America, towards the way that I have been attacked again and again and again, basically over my humanitarian rights. Beginning in 1989, whenever Homeland Security decided that they was going to intervene in Madison County, Jackson, Tennessee, by confiscating the sword symbolizing peace on earth from the ministry. And whenever I talk the talk pertaining to what I'm talking about, I can validate what I'm saying by having proof, records. And even a while ago, I made a telephone call to a brother Dennis over in Kenton, Tennessee. That's the pastor over in, I believe it's the Church of God, maybe it's the Assembly of God, I think it's the Church of God there in Kenton, about how that if we could sit down and maybe talk and discuss things about what had occurred in the past. And he said, why? What good is it? I said, because it helps to validate my story, my testimony, as far as bringing proof to my viewers that these are the occurrences that actually occurred. His response was, so what? And basically hung up the phone. This is a pastor over in Kenton, Tennessee, that I haven't spoken to, called, or been around, or seen, tangibly seen, I know, in over 2 years. But I know that he knows what went on pertaining to the mayor of Kenton, Tennessee, that used to be a Neil. And also, I know that he knows what went on in my life, going all the way back to Don Curry and Damian Cross, that used to be the mayor, going all the way back to 1983. But because he's willing to cover up the truth, and he's willing to protect certain individuals, he brushes me off by saying, who cares? Well, obviously, I must have cared, or I wouldn't have made the telephone call this morning and requested for us to get together and do a little powwow. But whenever you have corrupt preachers, corrupt teachers, and corrupt politicians and corrupt people that are willing to corrupt and cover up each other's corruption, that's the stagnation that you run into whenever you're trying to get your story out before the people. So, the people can judge me all they want by me using piracy type tactics in stealing or taking various individuals' testimonies from them without their awareness. Just like I got off the phone a while ago with a Daryl Plunk that I've been wanting to record and put him on record, of the individual that snuck into a movie theater at the age of 15, that promoted the ideal towards me getting high for the first time and me taking him to his house because he come up there on a bicycle, and I had just already gotten my driver's license permit to be able to drive an old Impala Chevrolet car. I just wanted to sit down and reminisce about some of the things that we went through together. A relationship going back 30, 35, 40 years ago. And he's another one that rejects. No, I don't want to talk to you, and you ain't recording nothing about me. Like the things that occurred didn't really occur. I don't want to pick and poke. I don't want to judge. I don't want to condemn. All I want is the truth. And I want to be able to verify the truth through testimony of having the proof. The proof to be able to validate my story before my viewers one day, of saying, okay, I'm just not saying this, but I have proof that these occurrences took place because of this testimony from this person, this testimony from that person, this testimony from this person, this occurred, that occurred, this happened whenever it happened, this happened whenever it happened. And of course right now everybody's saying, we don't care. Who cares what happened to you, Dennis? Who cares? Well, I guarantee you, if the shoe is on the other foot, and these same occurrences happen to these people towards being called out by God, of being the orchestra of a ministry, orchestrating a ministry, I guarantee you it would care to them. And they would be the same as myself towards having to use piracy type tactics just to be able to validate one's testimony. And I realize what it may look like in the eyes of some, but those are the ones that never did trust me. Those are the ones that never did support me. Those are the ones that never did care about me to begin with. Those was the ones with the attitude, who cares? The same as Daryl Plunk's attitude was whenever I gave him a call this morning, to the extent that he said, if you continue to call me or if you continue to come by, I'll put out a restraining order on you. Wow. He's went to my parents' funeral. I've went to his parents' funeral. He went to my son's wedding. He's eating at my family's table. I've eaten at his family's table. We're talking about a relationship that goes way back into the late 70s, long about 77, 78, 79. And you're going to take all those experiences, regardless whether they was good or bad, right or wrong, and you're going to throw them out Throw them out to the dogs. Flush them down the commode. Towards acting like that didn't none of it occur. This is the same type of resistance movement that I personally have been running into since I've come back here towards meeting up with a bunch of greedy, selfish people that could care less about anybody else's legendas or care less about anybody else's responsibilities or could care less about anybody else in general. These are the same type of radical type movements that I've been running up against again and again and again. Because these are the people that are guilty, and these are the people that don't want to open up. These are the people that don't want to help the Windmill Ministries. They haven't helped the Windmill Ministries in now 30 plus years. And you would think that there would be a time that you would think that they would know that they could be reformed from that by now supporting the Windmill Ministries, but they still declined to help the Windmill Ministries, knowing that the Windmill Ministries was not only right, but knowing that the Windmill Ministries supports peace, utopia, love, justice, fairness, the grace of God that it teaches out of the book of Revelations as well as the rest of the Bible. You would think that by now that they would come clean, but there's not. You know why they're not? Because the Bible verifies that pride, a person's ego, cometh before a fall. And I truly believe that that's one of the reasons why that we have seen horror after horror after horror, horrible things happening to the American people in one form or another, either in the form of divorce, in the form of abortions, in the form of debt, in the form of bad health, in the form of a nation being trillions of dollars in debt, in the form of 3 million plus incarcerated federal, state, and local prisoners, in the form of seeing all this ungodliness and all this corruptness that is not only going on with our political leaders, but going on amongst our spiritual leaders. That is the reason why that we have seen all the fires, all the floods, all the famines, all the pestilences, and of course the plague that is still not through with what it wants to do with the people on this planet. Until the people are willing to come clean, until the people are willing to go back, just as the Bible teaches in the first 4 chapters of Revelations, towards doing thy first works over again, I'm just afraid, folks, that we're going to see things escalate and even grow worse and worse and worse on every level that you can think of, regardless whether it be a weather, scientific level, a medical level, a geographical, flooding level, a social level, a moral level, a spiritual level. And all these levels will continue to grow worse until the people are willing to wisen up and do the right thing. This woman, this family, has done the right thing. I don't know about the rest of the issues pertaining to what people are griping about or what people are debating or what people are talking about, but I do know that for you to go out of your way in an adopting agency and adopt children, regardless whether they be from this country or another, is a predominant, various good thing for any individual to do, especially if their motives is in the right place towards doing them. God bless her. God bless her husband for going out of their way towards already having biological children, but then adopting 2 others.
So, your children have been wonderfully well behaved. I think you're an amazing role model for little girls. What advice would you give little girls?
Well, what I'm saying is not designed. My brother now has left. I was just thinking of what my dad told me before the spelling bee about anything boys can do, girls can do better. And since my sons are sitting behind me, I'll also say, but boys are great too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome again, Judge. Since I have the draw to always follow Senator Cruz, I did want to make one thing clear after listening to that for a half hour, that Joe Biden is Catholic and he is a man of faith. And then I want to turn to something else, and that is that we need a reset here, in my mind, for the people at home, a bit of a reality check. That this isn't normal right now. We have to understand that what people are dealing with, that 7.7 million people have gotten this virus, that 214,000 Americans have died. And for people watching at home and wondering what we're all doing in this room right now, and maybe you're home because you lost your job, or maybe you got your kids crawling all over your couch right now. Maybe you're trying to teach your first grader how to do a mute button to go to school. Or maybe you've got a small business that you had to close down or that's struggling. We should be doing something else right now. We shouldn't be doing this. We should be passing coronavirus relief like the House just did, which was a significant bill that would have been a big help. And I think people have to know that right now. And whether you're Democrat, Independent, or Republican. And that's why I started out yesterday by telling people that they need to vote. Number two, some of my colleagues throughout this hearing on the other side have been kind of portraying the job that the judge is before us on as being some kind of ivory tower exercise. I think one of my friends called it related that you'd be dealing with the dormant commerce clause. Well, I'm sure that might be true, but we also know that this is the highest court in the land, that the decisions of this court have a real impact on people. And I appreciated, Judge, that you said that you didn't want to be a queen. I actually wouldn't mind being a queen around here, if the truth be known. I wouldn't mind doing it, and kind of a benevolent queen and making decisions so we could get things done. But you said you wouldn't let your views influence you and the like, but the truth is the Supreme Court rulings, they rule people's lives. They decide if people can get married. They decide what schools they can go to. They decide if they could even have access to contraception. All of these things matter. So I want to make that clear. And the third reset here that I think we need to have is that this hearing is not normal. It is a sham. It is a rush to put in a justice. The last time that we had a vacancy so close to an election was when Abraham Lincoln was president. And he made the wise decision to wait until after the election. The last time we lost a justice so close to an election. That's what he did. Today, we are 21 days from the election. People are voting. Millions of people have already cast their ballots. And I go to the words of Senator McConnell. The last time we had a situation in election year, he said, the American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Therefore, this vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president. That set the precedent that so many of you have embraced, or at least you did a few years ago, and that is that in an election year, the people choose the president, and then the president nominates the justice. So why is this happening? Well, that's a good question. This guy, our president, he is the one that decided to plop a Supreme Court nomination in the middle of an election when people's health care is on the line with a case before the court on November 10th. So let's see what he said about the Supreme Court. Well, one of President Trump's campaign promises in 2015 was that his judicial appointments will do the right thing on Obamacare. You can see it right here. And in fact, Judge, just one day after you were nominated, this is like a few weeks ago, he said also on Twitter that it would be a big win if the Supreme Court strikes down the health law. So, Judge, my first question, do you think we should take the president at his word when he says his nominee will do the right thing and overturn the Affordable Care Act?
Senator Klobuchar, I can't really speak to what the president has said on Twitter. He hasn't said any of that to me. And what I can tell you, as I have told your colleagues earlier today, is that no one has elicited from me any commitment in a case or even brought up a commitment in the case. I'm 100% committed to judicial independence from political pressure. So whatever people's, party platforms may be or campaign promises may be, the reason why judges have life tenure is to insulate them from those pressures. So I take my oath seriously to follow the law. And, I have not pre-committed, nor would I pre-commit to decide a case any particular way.
Okay. And I think this life tenure, this idea that you have, just for everyone out there, a job for life, makes this even more important for us to consider where you might be. And I know you have not said how you would rule on this case that's coming up right after the election, where the president had said it would be a big win if the Supreme Court strikes down the law. But you have directly criticized Justice Roberts in an article in my own state in one of the Minnesota Law School journals. It was in 2017. It was the same year you became a judge. And when Roberts writes the opinion to uphold the Affordable Care Act, you said he, quote, pushed the Affordable Care Act beyond its plausible meaning to save the statute. Is that correct?
Senator Klobuchar, I just want to clarify, is this the constitutional commentary publication that you and I discussed?
Yes, it is. That it is, but it's still a University of Minnesota law. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure because
Yeah.
I hadn't published in the Minnesota law.
Again, did you ask that question? Did you say that he pushed the Affordable Care Act beyond its plausible meaning to save the statute?
One thing I want to clarify is you said that I criticized, Chief Justice Roberts, and I don't attack people, just ideas. So that was just designed to make a comment about his reasoning in that case, which as I've said before, is consistent with the way the majority opinion characterized it as the less plausible reading of the statute.
Okay, so you didn't agree.
And I like what she just said. I attacked the opinion versus the person. Whenever I made the letter this morning known in comparison to Jim Jones, I wasn't trying to say that Donald Trump is Jim Jones. What I'm trying to say is the comparison of one occult leader versus a president that's telling everybody that the coronavirus isn't a big deal and that he's immune and that everybody just needs to go back to working in their everyday lives like it's nothing. For him to underplay the coronavirus, not only now, but how he first started underplaying the coronavirus 5 or 6 months ago by saying that it would just go away, that it's basically a Democratic hoax, fits under the category of being not only reckless, but fits under the category of being similar towards an occult leader who basically lured, entrapped his followers into an early grave. That's what I was saying. It wasn't necessarily an attack upon to the person, but it was an attack upon to what the person has done in exchange to the lethalness of the coronavirus being as lethal as the poisonous cyanide that was put in the Kool-Aid. I'm going to end right there because this is a bit unusual in these affairs, the way that they're talking back and forth. I do want to get this one answer in towards what she wants to answer about Donald Trump, and then we're going to let this go because it becomes so complex that unless you really stay on top of all these different court proceedings and all these different arraignments and all these different hearings and all these different trials, whenever somebody gets a hold of my material, if I don't watch, I have fed entirely too much information into that information to the point that it goes over their heads and they don't understand truly what I'm trying to embark upon towards my particular message that I'm trying to make a point in. So I want to limit the complexity of all this to try to minimize it. That way it becomes more understandable to the common layman. In other words, where they can understand it more. Don't want to make it so complex and put so much material in there to the point that even an Einstein or a genius can't understand it. Because whenever you do that, then you have defeated your purpose. So let's listen to her answer, and after that, I'm going to bid everybody a good day.
With his reasoning in the case that upheld the Affordable Care Act.
What I said, and was this King versus Burwell or NFIB versus Sebelius?
That was NFIB versus Sebelius. I'll get to King versus Burwell in a second.
Okay. What I said with respect to NFIB versus Sebelius is that the interpretation that the majority adopted, construing the mandate to be a tax rather than a penalty, was not the most natural reading of the statute.
But it was still the reading that Justice Roberts got to. Now, you also criticized, as you pointed out by bringing up King v. Burwell, another case where the court ruled in favor of the health law. This was in a 2015 National Public Radio interview. And you acknowledged that the result of people being able to keep their subsidies under the Affordable Care Act would help millions of Americans. Yet you praised the dissent by Justice Scalia, saying the dissent had, quote, the better of the legal argument. Is that correct?
I did say that, yes.
Okay, so then would you have ruled the same way and voted with Justice Scalia?
Well, Senator Klobuchar, one of the plus sides or the upsides of being an academic is that you can speak for yourself. The professor professes and can opine, but it's very different than the judicial decision-making process. So it's difficult for me to say how I would have decided that case if I had to go through the whole process of judicial decision-making that I was describing this morning. Now, having been a judge for 3 years, I can say I appreciate greatly the distinctions between academic writing or academic speaking and judicial decision making, such that a judge might look at an academic and say, easy for you to say, because you're not on a multi-member court, you're not constrained by stare decisis, you don't have real parties in front of you, consulting with litigants, consulting with your clerks. It's just a different process.
I viewed this one so interestingly because you were commenting on the public policy result, which you and my colleagues on the Republican side have said this shouldn't be about public policy. And you said, okay, that's okay. But then you were really clear on your legal outcome in terms of your view of whose side you were on. You were on Scalia's side. And of course, that was a side to not uphold the Affordable Care Act, which would have been kicked millions of people off their health care in effect because they would have lost their subsidies. And I just see this as interesting because of this kind of dichotomy they're trying to make between policy and legal. And my view is that legal decisions affect policy. I mean, I'm looking at people in my state that'll deal with this if the Affordable Care Act is struck down. Elijah from St. Paul, who was born with cerebral palsy. Because of the Affordable Care Act, he is now 16 and is a proud Boy Scout. Casey, whose brother lives in Alexandria and he has chronic kidney failure, and he needs a transplant. Without the ACA, that'd be that. Or Burnett from the suburbs of St. Paul, whose daughter has multiple sclerosis, depends on benefits under the ACA. Liliana of Fridley, who has a 21-year-old son with autism and needs her children to be able to stay on her insurance until she's 26. Melanie, a senior from Duluth who's being treated for ovarian cancer and needs access to the Affordable Care Act. So my point is that these are real world situations. And so I get that you're not saying how you'd rule on these cases. So what does that leave us with here to try to figure out what kind of judge you would be? And I was thinking last night of when I was growing up, we would go up to northern Minnesota, and we didn't have a cabin, but we had friends that did. And we would go on these walks in the woods with my mom, and she loved to show all the tracks on that path, whether they were deer tracks, and she'd have us figure out what they were, or elk, or maybe even a bear. And we would follow these tracks down that path. And you'd always think, is there going to be a deer around the corner that we're going to see? And very rarely was there one. But we would follow the tracks. And so when I look at your record, I just keep following the tracks. That's what I've got to do. And so when I follow the tracks, this is what I see. You consider Justice Scalia one of the most conservative judges in the history of the Supreme Court as your mentor. You criticize the decision written by Justice Roberts upholding the Affordable Care Act. That is, to me, one big track. Even if you didn't consider yourself criticizing him personally, you criticized the reasoning. You then said in another case about the Affordable Care Act that you would that you liked the legal reasoning, that he had the better legal argument, that Justice Scalia had the better legal argument.
I want to weigh in real quick, and once more I apologize for weighing in again. They're picking this young girl apart. They're picking her apart. They're scrutinizing everything that she said, about when she said it, what her opinion was about other people's opinions, and this and that. And to me, it makes it so complex that you actually override what you're trying to achieve, because you're nitpicking too much. Now, there's no doubt she's a very, very intelligent judge. She voices her opinion. She's good opinionated. She describes whether or not she's talking about policy or law. She describes the atmosphere of what she interprets towards being crucial, or whether or not it's an atmosphere towards hearing somebody else's opinion about her own personal opinion. These are all different compartmentalizing beatitudes that every judge should have, regardless whether it's one from the county, state, federal, or a Supreme Court. One other thing I want to touch off on was my niece has had some problems out west pertaining to her 19-year-old son. I didn't know until just this week that he has been diagnosed with autism. Somebody that cannot comprehend things in the right form of reality the way that most people can. Whenever it comes to healthcare insurance, regardless whether it's autism, regardless whether it's being diabetic, regardless whether it's somebody that needed a serious operation, we as a society over here in America have to start realizing that if we do not start appropriating our health care regards, our health care measurements, the same as Canada and the same as other pre-existing countries, we are not just going to be left out and left in the dark, but we are going to be looked upon as being a barbaric, heathenistic type government that allows for these cruel endeavors to fall upon to its own citizens at their expense, which to me is cold, callous, harsh, and cruel. I know the things that I have talked about today have been enlightening towards what that I wanted to talk about, not necessarily the things that anybody else wanted to talk about. My personal opinion is validated upon my opinion. I have the right to my opinion. My opinion did not cost nobody nothing. I'm not charging nobody for my opinion. I have the right to that opinion, regardless whether I'm opinionizing over First Amendment rights, gun rights, or medical rights. I do want to clarify for the final and last time. We have to get it right this time. If not, we are at the crossroads to the point that we have so much at stake. Good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless those who are trying to reach out and follow the consciousness of God in the obedience of all of His commandments towards living a righteous, godly life. And shalom. Shalom to God's people who are striving to worship a God of the living and not a God of the dead through the teachings of His glorious Son, Jesus Christ of Nazareth.